Welcome to the latest episode of the Blazing Musket Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Benzone. We're joined this week by Hayden Bird. Hayden Bird, of course, has been on the show many times before. Hopefully you have heard and enjoyed him before. And if not, you will certainly do so on this week's episode. Hayden is a sports journalist for the Boston Globe and Boston.com. He covers the Revs on a regular basis and covers a little bit of everything else in the world of sports. But soccer is, of course, his first true love in the sports world. And that is what he has joined us to talk about today. Hayden, anyway, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Last time you were on, you were trying to take some time off and recover from the World Cup and recharge the batteries and get back into the old routine of covering the Revs. How has that gone? Do you feel recharged having watched the Revs come out of this break?
It's sort of unrelated to the Revs in a sense. I won't put this all on them, but not really, honestly. The batteries are still running pretty much on empty, but I did get a week off in there and it was pretty blissful, but it's already just I don't know, can I swear? It's already raining shit once again, I feel like on us. And I mean that just like, it's like because as you said, like, we do a little bit of everything at BDC, and so obviously the Patriots camp's going again, and the Red Sox have been on this crazy run, and so it's just like we came out of the World Cup and I had very little time to sort of readjust back into the sort of the friendly confines, but the chaotic confines of New England sports as opposed to sort of this international event that we were on. Having said that, though, obviously I love coming back and covering the Revs. I mean, as much as you're like, oh, well, it should be a letdown to go back there after the World Cup. It's like, yeah, but at the same time, like I didn't have to like go buy like armored Humvees and like 20 security checkpoints and all this other nonsense, which, of course I was happy to do for the World Cup, but it's just like, yeah, it's nice to go back to just reality in a sense that like you can just go to a place where like literally people know your name. It's like the security people there and like, obviously all the other reporters and everything. And it's like, it's fun to just go back there. Also, real media dining, which of course FIFA did not give us, but shout out to the Crafts on that front. They do comparatively, I guess, hook it up. So, it's good to be back. But at the same time, yeah. I can't say, I don't know. I can't say I'm rested, man. It's just like, it's one thing, one battle after another, I guess, is also the sort of subplot of New England sports a lot of the time. And that has definitely been true this summer, both soccer and otherwise. I mean, you think about all the things that have happened, but just within the Revs, I mean, obviously now it's like, they're making moves, but at the same time, they seem to be entering a challenging part of their schedule and not necessarily playing their best ball. So of course, I don't want to get too far into it, but yeah, we could talk about that. But yeah, a lot going on.
Yeah, yes. I mean, the Red Sox kind of all of a sudden are in contention to make the playoffs. That didn't really look like that was going to materialize in June. Yeah, they kind of quietly snuck up, during like the second half of the World Cup, and all of a sudden, they're right in the thick of it. Jaylen Brown got traded from the Celtics, so that obviously kicked off a whole bunch of talk and discussion about how that's all going to work out. The Patriots, I mean, they kind of dominate everything. So once they get going, my stepkids have been going. They went to like 3 of the practices. It's amazing. Thousands of people will turn out to watch a football team practice. But yeah,
as Allen Iverson would say.
But yeah, there is certainly a lot going on in New England, and just outside of New England, the MLS has announced that they're going to have a new commissioner. Larry Berg is going to replace Don Garber in 2027. Don't know too much about him, but what do you know about him? And does this pretty much seem like the kind of guy that they would go with to move on from Don Garber?
I will begin by just admitting I do not pretend to know a ton about Larry Berg yet. Obviously, I mean, he's kind of new to the stage here, and since he's not really, someone that we would cross paths with too much in a soccer sense before this, or really in any sense before this, especially as a sports reporter. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend that I know a ton about him. Obviously, I know, I've gone through kind of his resume a little bit, and as most people have. And so, okay, so you see, of course, there's always some local tie. He went to Harvard Business School. So, right. Yeah, okay. So he's been around the area before, I guess. And then, you look at the other thing and he's a private equity guy. And so that's kind of, I guess, and maybe that's an unfair characterization, if there are boosters of his out there, I suppose, but just that is the thing that stands out on his resume is that I think it's like 30 years with Apollo Global Management, who I think were in the news today doing that $2.6 billion deal with the Yankees. And so they are a sports oriented, um, you know, private equity firm. And he is one of those guys, but he also then obviously was, heavily involved with LAFC. And so that's, his soccer origin. So I would say that, he is a business guy. He fits the profile of who I would think. He's a business guy who also has a soccer background. Would I have maybe preferred it to be the other way around a little bit more for a commissioner? Yeah, but I don't make those calls, and also this is a business, and so I understand why they've made that decision, even if in my own sort of more whimsical journalistic aims of what I think the league should be, I don't necessarily love that decision.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, he is the commissioner, right? So I mean, he does get effectively chosen and approved by all the other owners. So it's not a surprise that they decided to go with a current owner. And I think this is something that if you follow other, major American sports, this is pretty standard operating procedure, right? The owners of a league that are relatively happy with how things aren't going to go and bring somebody in that is going to come in and right away start talking about all these all these big changes. One of the first things that he quickly kind of tried to put to bed. He was asked about promotion relegation. Is that a thing? And he pretty much said no, I wouldn't expect it anytime soon. So just understanding how MLS is structured, it's almost like even if they wanted to, the way that this league is, the way that you buy into this league, is it any surprise that they were very quick to say, look, don't get too excited that we're going to do pro rel just because the USL wants to do a version of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think he would be the last one who will be the one that you will hear, and not him personally, but just as like the commissioner of Major League Soccer, he will probably be the last person in America who will say a positive thing about promotion relegation until it is literally brought to his desk and like forced upon him, because that's how this is going to go. It's, as you said, like he's a guy chosen by the owners, so he represents the owners. And again, this is nothing against this guy or even this league. This is just how commissioners work in pretty much most sports. Baseball used to be a little bit different back in the day. They used to be a little bit more independent, but I think in the last couple decades, they've kind of set the mold there in terms of having it be kind of one of their guys from within the ownership circle, so to speak, or from that group essentially. And so he's an owner's guy. So yeah, obviously the owners are probably the single group that is, standing athwart a possible promotion relegation systems implementation in the U.S. They are the biggest, opponent to that. And so the commissioner, as their guy, is going to publicly be the mouthpiece. Like, maybe not explicitly against that, but just he's going to duck that question, or he's going to downplay it, or he's just, they're just not going to be into it. They're just never going to be into it because it, again, it's a business, and business wise, why would they ever do that? That's potentially, in their view, sort of financial suicide. And perhaps it would be for those who are short-sighted and run bad teams, or maybe just unlucky or whatever. Like that's just how that would work. I think they're missing the bigger picture of like the potential that would have if you introduce that on a major league level in the United States to an audience that has just never seen that before. But yeah, I'm not surprised at all that he would be a conservative figure who would, be careful with his words and very measured, especially talking about such a hot button issue in American soccer as promotion relegation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, just with the MLS being, the single entity that it is and buying it, anyone that bought into MLS as a league with two conferences that doesn't have promotion relegation isn't necessarily going to be too excited to hear that actually we'd like to take what you paid for. And increasingly, it is very, very expensive to get into MLS. Yeah, so it's a nice idea, right? And so it's not necessarily, he might really like promotion relegation. But at the same time, it's like, well, I can like it as much as I want, but it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the way that this league is constructed. And I think a lot of people just kind of want to try and ignore that or push it to one side and just act like they could just go and do this and it would be fine. When really, it's not designed to work that way. So you can't just go and flip a switch. We always talk about like with people saying like people are calling for the Revs to like use their buyouts, right? It's really easy to spend somebody else's money. It's really easy to take somebody else's $500 million investment and say, well, why don't we make it into something completely and totally different?
Yeah, and it's a it's a metaphor, and maybe this is off base or whatever, but it's like for people who want to have like sort of universal healthcare in this country, and it's like, man, that would be great, and it would make sense, and it would probably be, and everyone else does it. Why don't we do it? And we should do that here. And we all, I mean, I don't know, we all. I agree in principle, but I also realize, like, from my friends who like work in healthcare and whatnot, and I'm not saying this is an argument against or whatever, but it's just a comparison of like it's kind of unwieldy to like implement in at this point because we have this whole system that's built up around it. So even though it would be a really good idea, and I think we should try to do it at some point someday, the like short term would be like chaos and kind of insane and just like very problematic. And that's the same thing with MLS. If they went to promotion relegation, as you're right, like these owners, it's not their fault that they feel obligated to make money on this when they were forced to pay that, the expansion fees, which just keep going up and up. I actually don't know what the total is right now, but it's like it's a ton of money. It's way more money than obviously any other sort of comparable league in the world. And so then you're saying like, oh yeah, and also by the way, you might be playing AAA in next year or AA 2 years from now or whatever. Yeah, that's not something that they're ever gonna get behind. And so I understand that. I understand all the elements in the equation in terms of like why it's deadlocked and not happening. I don't love it, and I would like if we could overcome that. But yeah, I do on a basic level. I can. The most I'll ever be able to empathize with some millionaire owner is just like, yeah, like you basically got duped. It's like, or you were sort of lied to. I can understand that on a basic level. Yeah, even if I don't have as much sympathy for it as other people, but yeah, no, I understand. I see their point from that perspective, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like they've gone an awful long time with things the way that they are. And the longer you go with it in that way, the harder it is to turn around and say, well, we're actually going to do something. Like, what are they going to do? They can turn around and compensate these guys for if they come up with something that says, well, if we go down, we're going to lose X number of dollars. So you need to compensate us for that for, like for 3 years, which, I mean, they do parachute payments in the Premier League, but the Premier League is on a whole other stratosphere of operation in many different ways. But the other thing is too, though, is MLS is already trying to get people used to something that they are not used to in America, which is starting in the fall of 2027, they are going to play about half the season, take a break for 2 months, which leagues here don't do. Unless, look, hockey takes a break for the Olympics, but I think it's like a month. But they certainly don't do it every year. And then they're going to come back and play the second half of the season after a 2-month break. So Don Garber was the commissioner when this got voted in and it's going to happen and it's going to take place. Is this potentially a good time for Don Garber to leave and say, well, we've finally gotten this thing switched around. We're aligned with the global calendar, which we think is really important for transfer fees. Is now a good time for him to leave before we all find out whether this works or not?
Well, I mean, that's one way, I guess, to look at it. I don't know exactly what his specific motivations were for choosing this moment, but it does feel like potentially a capstone achievement for him potentially in terms of his sort of legacy that he could look at, and the league's expansion. I was thinking about this recently because I was looking at like when his tenure began. It began in 1999. I guess I had forgotten that. Is that like it really spanned an incredible period of time, I guess. And I sort of always underrated that, I guess, to an extent. And so, you think about that whole run of time and everything that happened in MLS since then. Yeah, I mean, this might not be the number one thing in his legacy, but this would be something that he could point to and be like, okay, see, this was it. Like I steered us. My last thing was to put us sort of in the same position, alongside all these other leagues in the world and to, help, again, kind of bring MLS into the world community a little bit there. Even though by design they are as a single entity league, like very much sort of not still, but I don't know. We can get into that in terms of like the league and what it is and whatnot, but yeah, he could look at that. But you're right though. I mean, it is a huge gamble, and you look at all the markets. I mean, we are in one of those markets where it will be very much affected by this change. And how that will play out, I mean, yeah, time will tell there, and perhaps he might enjoy watching that from the sideline as opposed to being the one having to field all of this stuff if it was maybe if it starts to go south or or pun intended goes north a little bit too far there too early. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, if they end up with, you know, all or several of the teams in the northern half of the country, and obviously, the Canadian teams, this is a bit of a challenge for them as well, particularly Toronto. Toronto really has no indoor early season option. Montreal is in some sort of discussion to try and revamp the Olympic Stadium, which is currently, it's just a venue that you can't seriously play games in at this point in time. They're trying to do something there, and of course in Vancouver, they have to figure out if they can even stay in Vancouver first of all. But it could be a situation where a third of the league is really saying, actually, you know what, our attendance is really being hit pretty hard here. I mean, you're at Gillette Stadium just as much as anybody else. I don't know if you were there for the BTS concerts along with Sam Latsoff last week, but you're there as much as anybody else. Like, I mean, you can see what happens when school gets out and the weather turns and the attendant, look, however people are getting these tickets, right? Like they had 34,000 a couple of weeks ago. Okay, 10,000 of those were free, but still, every summer, their best attended games are July, August, when school is out. So a chunk of that is going to disappear, right? Some of our favorite games to go to are in June. The weather's beautiful, and it's a great time. So I mean, does that jump out to you as a big concern, particularly for the Revs, Philadelphia, the two New York teams, the teams that are Chicago, the teams that are outside and in cold weather, and there's nowhere to hide from it.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a concern. I think it's a little different maybe in the Revs case because as you're sort of projecting this outward, you're then projecting, far enough to the point where potentially there's an Everett Stadium as there seems to be on track to be at this point. I don't know how to couch my phrasing so it doesn't jinx it, but it's like it's happening. It's pretty much happening at this point. Like they just need to go and do, clear all these hurdles in the regulatory system and then actually like start the project. But assuming that gets done, then they'll be in Everett as opposed to Gillette, and then it's kind of a different crowd that you have there. And so that's harder to project in my mind because I don't know what that looks like at this point yet. But what I absolutely know is you are correct. Like as it stands right now at playing in a Gillette Stadium venue, um, you're not doing well in the early months there. Like it is kind of a struggle bus to get people, even on a beautiful Saturday, in April when that does happen. It's like it's still obviously not going to be a warm. You're not competing with a warm summer night. Gillette, which are great. It's like being at those games in July and August, like when it's like, sort of dusk and it's just like great weather and whatnot, like that, those are great times there. And I think everyone kind of enjoys that. So that will be, just a loss for them. Absolutely. But also, yeah, I mean, as you're looking at it, you're projecting into the future, you're saying, hopefully we have a stadium in Everett by then. And you have, you're maybe attracting a different audience who will be okay going to those games. You younger crowd, younger professional crowd, or however you want to define it, and they're going to be showing up. And if you're packing them into a venue, perhaps they'll do that. So maybe they might be a little bit less affected by some of this initially if they have the shiny new stadium going for them, the first couple of years there. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's a gamble. It's absolutely a gamble.
Yeah, no, I think it could be a little bit of short term, and of course we don't know how long the short term is going to be until the stadium is actually done, completed. They move. I mean, I don't think anybody is prepared to put a specific year out there because every time someone seems to do that, you basically just go ahead and tack another year onto whatever they say. Right? The Boston Legacy are supposed to be in White Stadium now, and they're currently hoping for the middle of next year. And middle, there's some leeway with what middle means. So for sure that'll be interesting. Look, I know that you're not too exposed to MLS being on Apple TV because obviously you're at the home games and then you have to watch the away games no matter what because it's part of your job. So you know where the games are, you know how to find them. But just generally, I would imagine that Garber thought this Apple TV deal was going to be this revolutionary thing that they were really getting out in front of. This is how sports are going to be broadcast now. There's been a lot of criticism. So how do you feel that Larry Berg here should approach what they do with their next TV deal? Do they need to try and go back with something like an ESPN where they can put it on ABC and they can stream it and try and get it out there a little bit more? Or do you think that maybe they just did the Apple TV thing? Maybe they did a little too early and they need to stick with it so people can get used to finding the games there.
I have different thoughts on this. I think my current take is I think they do miss something by not being having more of a local option for people to see them and to maybe try to put themselves out there a little more and you're casting to a wider audience as opposed to narrow casting kind of by this streaming deal, which is kind of the option they went to. I just think that they've haven't leveraged the Apple thing as much as they could have, but I do think that there is something to be said for like, why did you put yourself in a place where just fewer people can see you when not that many people in comparison to the other teams in the region are necessarily seeing you anyway? Why would you be the one to try to jump to that level of kind of exclusivity in comparison to them or in comparison to any other league in a sense, or most other leagues in that sense? Yeah, I don't know. I think the next one, and again, as for what Larry Berg will do, he's going to do whatever is best for the league's bottom line because he's a business guy. So it's like, if they pony up and do this again, which I don't think they'll do, but if they did, he would sign, yesterday on that one. But I think what they should try to do is, I'm not a media sort of, I don't understand the ins and outs of like how to sort of amplify that in the best way, but it does feel like they are missing something by, it's like, oh, you're removing yourself onto a streaming service. Now, granted, if it was a different streaming service, I don't know, maybe it's different, or maybe it goes differently. It's like, I think Apple, first of all, I do love pretty much every show on that streaming service. It's like I'm currently watching Silo, love that thing. I know people got problems with it, whatever. I'm still in, but it's like, it's a great service, but I just feel like it's of the sort of big ones that people at least know, it's probably the least popular, or it's one of the least popular ones. I don't have numbers in front of me on that, but I feel like just like, sort of the people in my life, that's like a less sort of watched one than say like Netflix, obviously at this point still. And so I'm curious, like if they had gotten that with another more mainstream, like Amazon Prime or something, maybe this would have gone differently. But even with like, Prime, football and whatnot, like, that's just one thing. And even they, initially had some sort of growing pains and problems around that. So you're right. Maybe they were just early on this, but I think right now, yeah, my call would be in the next one. Like you want to try to get back to some closer to home a little bit in terms of like some, local option for local fans to just find your team to re-engage a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, this stuff has gotten way more complicated, since it used to just be really simple. You had a cable subscription and you could add on, any number of packages to get all the stuff that you wanted. It just gets really complicated. Like just recently, like within like the last 2 or 3 weeks, if you had YouTube TV, which we do, we just now got ESPN Unlimited, which was supposed to be included with a YouTube TV subscription like a year ago. And it took them an eternity to integrate YouTube TV with ESPN so that you can sign into one and sign. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is I couldn't watch the Royal Rumble this year because I had YouTube TV and I should have had ESPN Unlimited, but I didn't. But I could have got it if I was willing to pay more, even though I wasn't supposed to because I'm a YouTube TV subscriber. Like it gets really complicated really quick. Or like Nesson is another great example. You can't watch Nesson on YouTube TV. So what we do every year is we just wait it out until August to see how the Red Sox are doing. And if they're in playoff contention, we sign up for Nesson 360 for 2 months to get through the rest of the regular season. But we won't, I'm not going to spend $360 a year to watch the Red Sox, and we don't really watch the Bruins. So this stuff gets really, really complicated where they can say, I think NWSL is probably the worst example. I don't even know where sometimes they're on TV, sometimes they're not. They're on a streaming service I've heard of. They're on a streaming service I've never heard of. So I just, the whole, how do I watch things has gotten really, really complicated. When I always kind of thought with streaming, it would be, shouldn't it be the opposite? Shouldn't it be the easiest thing in the world? Turn TV on, watch soccer game. Oh, hey, look, there it is.
Yeah, well, and for a period of time, I almost kind of want to write about this at some point, and maybe someone has probably in a more thoughtful way, but just like, for a brief period of time, like 10 years ago, or no, I would longer now, like 15, almost 20 years ago, the average American could watch more Premier League games than the average like person in England because of the blackouts and whatnot. And you had multiple channels where you could catch them, or you could catch them on demand. I think the first couple of years that NBC had the rights, like you could just go like find your team and just watch like the game on demand. I'm trying to remember all this stuff, but it was like they had all these options, and that was before the sort of streaming things. Then they put it all behind increasingly behind more and more and more paywalls. And then that was kind of the retreat that took place in the last decade of,
Yeah.
like slowly but surely the thing that you were saying that should be the case is just boom, game on, game's on, it's like that sort of disappeared behind the shroud of all these, subscriptions and logins and, decoupled packages of things and whatnot, or things that should be packaged, as you said, but weren't because, the bureaucracy isn't there yet or whatever. And it's become much more obscured. I will say Legacy are at very least on YouTube TV more often than not, I've found.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And that's great. I've definitely watched a bunch of their games just from that. And, very interested in that team, by the way. Patau is a very interesting coach. But anyway, that's tangent. But yes, I do think yeah, I mean it's kind of out of control, but that's also a microcosm for just like media a little bit right now in terms of just like too many subscriptions, too sort of balkanized for its own good. No one knows how to really make money in a standalone way. I mean, all these different things. I mean, the fact that I can't really watch the Red Sox at all unless I pay, was it like $30 a month?
$30 a month. Yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah,
and
exactly.
technically, I guess John Henry is my boss. So I mean, and I was on Nesson once. So I don't know, man. Like, I feel like I should maybe get a login or something somewhere, but I don't. So, and they're not on YouTube TV. And like, I thought maybe, someone at some point was going to blink in that staring contest and we get, some movement there, but it just has not. And I think that's just kind of their plan, is to just never go back to things like that. So it's a little sad in that way, because like things that should be within your grasp, I mean, technically they are, but only if you just like have $1 million or whatever, or whatever, you just have an unlimited budget for this sort of thing, which of course no one except for a fraction of people will ever really do.
Yeah, for sure. Like there was a time, like you said, where it was pretty easy to like there. Back when I used to watch like 7 or 8 games a week, you could pretty easily watch. You could watch the Bundesliga on ESPN, no problem. You could watch La Liga on BN Sport. You could watch the Premier League, like you said. They used to put games on like on NBC Sports. They'd throw a game on CNBC. Like they really tried to get it out to as many people initially, and then they slowly pulled it all back to where now you have to have Peacock basically. In addition to all, but if you want to follow a team in the Premier League, if they qualify for a European competition and you want to watch the cup matches, I mean, good luck to you. You've got to subscribe to 4 different things to watch one team in 4 different competitions. I mean, it's crazy. Like Fubo used to be like $30 a month, and it was basically just sports. They had sports and channels that nobody conceivably would ever watch for any reason. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Yeah, it's pretty rough. But I wonder do you think they would look at something where they put all the games in one place? Maybe not Apple TV, but they put all the games on Amazon Prime, but they let each team negotiate a deal for like a local channel to only show away games, right? So like, let's say Nesson probably wouldn't do it, but let's just say they did. Like Nesson has New England Revolution away or NBC Sports Boston. They have Revs away games only. And then if you want to watch a home game, you've either got to go to the game or pay for the all-inclusive thing. Like, do you think like some sort of like a hybrid like that might be, a little bit more appealing? Because I think USL to a certain extent does that. Like, you can watch it on ESPN, but some teams show some games on a local network as well.
I think, I mean, whether it's that or something similar to that, like some kind of creative solution has to be the answer for them at this stage, I think. And in their, growth as a team. And I say that as, they're 25 years old, but it's like, yeah, I do think, that would be a smarter approach because I think you kind of have to, you can't commit all the way to this, like, either join Apple or don't watch us type thing. And I know that there are exceptions to that. Like there still are games on like Fox but that's like very infrequent. And I can't remember the last time that was true for the Revs. And so it's like if you and I don't blame them, but like over the last 2 years, but yeah, I mean, I think if you have some carve out in there, I think that's cool. And I think that would be maybe a good way to get people in, which, as you said, then if you're like, hey, you do it in a way so that you're like, all right, we'll incentivize home game attendance, which is tougher in New England because if you're saying New England, I mean, those poor guys up in northern Maine are like, what are we supposed to do? Like schlep to Gillette every home game, but at the same time, like maybe some people that's just the compromise that you're gonna have to make to do that. But also, I feel like I don't know if they could ever do that just in terms of like negotiating with Apple over that, like where how much money would they get out of that or whatever. I'm sure that would negatively affect the windfall that came in from the last time. I don't know if they're going to get that again anyway, so who knows, but I do think like that would be the smartest approach, but also that we can just see that makes sense probably means that financially it will make no sense for them or whatever. I don't know, so it's like I won't pretend to know the ins and outs of that side of it though.
But and who knows, I mean, it would, if it was a 5-year contract, it might take 5 years to negotiate all that anyway. And then and then what's the point? But just to kind of wrap up on Garber, you said, look, he's been in this job since 1999. Do you think his overall, look, a lot of people say a lot of negative things about Don Garber for some reasonable and also some unreasonable. Some people want to blame everything on one guy for their issues with MLS soccer. But when he took over this league in 1999, I mean, there was no guarantee that this league was even going to survive. Like, I mean, I think they dropped down to like 10 teams for a couple. Like, I mean, when he came in, he went through some very, very bleak times where it looked like this league, this whole thing could just roll up and go away and be a failure, within 10 years of its creation. But he has seen it through to, it's a 30-team league. It's sustainable. And now we're at a point where we can talk about, you're talking about a TV deal instead of, is this league going to be here in 5 years?
No, absolutely. And I think like, the best parts of Don Garber's legacy, and there are people who, I mean, shout out to the Revs Recap logo that we are doing this in the light of this podcast in right now, because I'm sure someone like Sean Donahue would have a much more, sort of nuanced answer to this about that as someone who has really, been a sort of unofficial historian of this league in a lot of ways. Or my colleague Frank Delapa would have a great, response on this too. But from my perspective, you're right. Like Garber succeeded in a sense of just keeping the league going. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day of like the Revs, and I just referenced this of like, oh, well, they're still a younger team at, they're 25 years old. I think that's like, is that not the longest running top level soccer team sort of in New England history already? Like, because I'm like, Fall River Marksmen existed 100 years ago. I don't think they had a run that was like 25 years in like top flight soccer. And that's not entirely their own fault, obviously. It's just more of a statement of affairs for the league and system that, as quote unquote, as it existed in that time. But I do think the Revs are, whatever metric you want to use, I think they are the longest running New England top level team that's existed professionally. And so that's, as a sort of, just now extrapolating that over MLS, that's like, that is an achievement, I mean, and North American Soccer League, it folded in a shorter period of time, and there were reasons for that. And MLS, for all of their problems, did learn from that, at least in some sense. Now, I feel like Garber's legacy, it's like one of those things that looks great from like 100 yards away, and then kind of the closer you get, you notice, oh, I don't know about that, or what about that, and what about that? And there's plenty of that, right? But that's true for any commissioner in any league. I'm not going to hand wave, all the things in regard to his tenure, and the league is beset by a number of major problems. I think like one of the primary ones that I talk about with my colleague Frank Delapa is, and with all the writers and pretty much all people around the league, is like the league has the rule structure is just too Byzantine and just too ridiculous. The rosters are just just an unintelligible mess to anyone not from here, basically. Anyone, it's always like the football manager thing of like anyone who tries to do a save in MLS who's not from the US or North America, and it's just like, what are these rules? I can't do it. I don't know how this works or anything. So it's a fairly unapproachable product in that way, and that's not good, right? And there are a lot of other things that I'm sure people could pick out about Garber's legacy. But yes, in broad strokes, I mean, he did keep this thing in the air for his entire tenure, and has had some notable wins. I mean, they brought in Beckham and Messi in that time, along with a bunch of other guys. They've developed players. It's a real league at this point. It's a viable product. Whatever its its myriad issues. I mean, like that is in a sense, actually something that would be familiar to a lot of other leagues. It's like, well, they have all this stuff and they have all these issues as well, but they are a real league. And that is what you can say, whatever else, currently about Don Garber's Major League Soccer.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look, the League's Cup, nobody likes the League's Cup. He had a large role in bringing that in. They've tried
any number of initiatives there. It's like you can go down the line. I don't dispute that.
I mean, they tried to kill the U.S. Open. They don't really like the U.S. Open Cup, or they've decided not to try and embrace it and make it into a bigger thing. They've tried to push it away. But I did on the point about the sound, the fact that every time the Revs make a roster move, a lot of us that don't jump to getting the hot take out as soon as possible. We first have to go and talk to somebody like Greg Johnstone and be like, okay, can you please explain to us what has just happened here? Like, there was a player has left and TAM has been received. Do we have to use this now? Can we use it next year? Is some of it now? Like, there's like TAM for like this year, but then for next year, is there an exchange rate? Like, we have to go and check with Greg to please explain to us what has actually just occurred. Because like in the NBA, it was very simple, right? The Celtics traded Jaylen Brown and they got Paul George and they got and people understand what draft picks are and what money is. And even a trade exception is pretty simple to explain. We have a $15 million.
Because even in the NBA, it's actually not like that simple. It's fairly complicated. But even in the NBA, by comparison, it's like still fairly Byzantine. But it's just nothing compared to the stratospheric level of rulemaking that you see from MLS rosters. It's that. So that's interesting that you point that out. Because you're like, yeah, NBA. It is actually ultimately, despite all their salary cap, equalizers and trade exceptions, a much simpler, slicker process to understand for a fan than whatever we see with most things we see with MLS.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Like there's aprons and second aprons, and it's pretty rough unless you're familiar with MLS. It's like, well, this is actually this is nothing.
No, this is old hat for us. Yeah,
this is like adding and subtracting compared to algebra. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and they have talked about actually, they are currently talking about making some adjustments to the salary cap structure and trying to make some of this stuff easier. If you were included in those conversations, I mean, for me, I think it would be very simple. The TAM GAM thing, just get rid of it. Get rid of these players. Just get rid of everything except for let me ask you this. Would you simplify everything down to you can spend up to this much, you can not spend less than this much, you have to have at least this many players and keep the DPs? Or would you rather see them move away from the DP model?
I think I would like to see them as much as possible gut a lot of these the specific roster restrictions and maybe just try to clean it out and make it a simpler, yeah, like, okay, you can have a couple DPs and then you spend up to a certain cap. I do like the spending floor thing too, honestly, because I think like that's important, but also I think that there should be incentivizing. We were talking about this the other night with some of the writers, like what incentive is there? Because in the current MLS roster system, it just feels like, and I understand this. This isn't anyone's fault. This isn't by design. This isn't some malicious thing or whatever. It's just like how this works out is like you're always it behooves you to use your DPs on like attacking players, basically, right? Like anytime
Yeah.
you see like a DP is like a goalie or like a left back or something, you're like, who let that happen? What was that? Or it's like or there's some very specific reason for that, like Tim Howard or something. And even then, it's like those usually don't work out. So usually it's like attacking players, and that's just kind of the model. So, but then what incentive do a lot of clubs have to, I guess, develop younger players at those attacking positions because they're like, we're just always going to be trying to, looking for some high profile or higher profile veteran to play at those spots. It affects your development a little bit. And so I don't know how you incentivize it, but it's like if you could incentivize clubs to like spread those things around a little bit, or if you, I guess, just find other ways to incentivize developing things. The U22 initiative thing is as much like of a hard time as people give it. Like, that's not a bad thing in a sense. I know that there are problems with it too. And again, it's just like another sort of officializing a thing that should just sort of be happening on a roster anyway. But if they're trying to like incentivize things, I don't hate those things. And so, it's hard to say. I think I just am with probably it's probably a pretty milquetoast take that I'm just like, yeah, you could gut a lot of the GAM and the TAM and try to phase out a lot of that stuff, which I think they're trying to do anyway. I think it was just like, they for a while, I mean, but we were talking about the Apple deal. I think before that, like you saw salaries for especially the lower level players who were just kind of breaking in or just, the minimum level veterans or whatever, like those salaries were still very low. They have come up in the last couple of years, obviously. And so now it's a little more comparable. The disparities, I think, between the DPs and kind of everyone else is something that does concern me, though. I would like to see that. I know that's how the market works a little bit, but it's like I'd like to see that close a little bit. And so if that continues to happen, then maybe I'd say you do revisit the designated player thing because maybe that's just sort of a it's exacerbating the issue in terms of like widening the disparities there. So maybe that, but I think in general, yeah, like I'm a realist. I understand you kind of have to keep some of these carve outs for a little while, but it's sort of like the schedule, I guess. Ultimately, the closer you can align with the rest of the world, probably the better, because that's going to help you do business down the road, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. I do think there's definitely things that they could do to make it to make it simpler, but also still like, hey, look, if you we're not telling you that you can't go and spend $15 million to bring a player in, right? Like I don't think they necessarily want to take that part of it away, but yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago that somebody like an Emma Boateng who's been in the league for like 10 years, I think he was on like 125,000. It's like he's on like 125 and like Noel Buck was on like 120. Like, no disrespect to Noel Buck, but Noel Buck was 18. Emma Boateng was like 29 years old, 10-year veteran, and they're on almost the same money. Yes,
That
yeah.
even independently was just
Yeah, yeah.
silly because it was like that almost like in my mind that there was no excuse. There wasn't even like a salary disparity thing. I think just like we were always just like, who are these scouts who just look past Eva Boateng or like what I don't know what is happening here, because every year I agree we would just look at it and be like, that man on like 200K maybe at some point it was like it got up to like that and you're like, can you give him like a little more? He's like one of the
Yeah.
best players for a period of time, like, or like one of the more dynamic, sort of bench options that they've probably had in the last decade or whatever. And that guy was like a minimum level guy. No, that I agree. It's a wider issue, but just separately, Hima Boateng, that was an individual crime that was committed by the league on that man. He should have absolutely been paid more than that.
Yeah, they should just call the league minimum. They should put something in a veterans minimum. Just call it the Boateng minimum. Like, look, you cannot pay someone who's been in the league for 10 years any less than this amount of money. I also really appreciated how they re-signed him every year with an option, which they then declined. Like, like the
It was like
annual.
the anti Tim Wakefield deal. It
Yeah,
was like, they like lined him up to then like sort of Lucy with the football, pull it away at the last second. You're like, oh, and then they're like, just JK, man, we'll have you back in training camp or whatever. And you're like, can you just like be nice to Ima Boateng? I don't know. It always rubbed me the wrong way because he seemed like, I don't know. I don't know him, but he was always cool with media and he just seemed like teammates liked him. And you're like, why wouldn't you want to keep this guy around? So,
yeah,
random
yeah.
tangent, but I will die on that hill every time though. They should have absolutely paid him more.
No, absolutely. Okay, look, last question on this. The MLS Super Draft. You're in charge for 10 minutes, and you get to decide whether they keep it or they get rid of it. What would you do with the MLS Super Draft? Which again, some people say, look, it's there. It's a nice way for late blooming players to get a chance in the league. There are teams that take advantage of that, and you do see a couple of players come in and contribute, every year. But there are a lot of people that say, look, it's just kind of an antiquated thing that we don't need anymore. The NWSL has gotten rid of their draft. So Hayden Bird is the commissioner for 10 minutes. What do you do with the MLS Super Draft?
I think for now you keep it just because like I think it's a fun exercise for people from around the world. Having just gone through that whole spiel about like we need to standardize and like bring it in so that people can come in. I'm like, no, you know what? It's fun to imagine Europeans coming like, what the bloody heck is a draft? And like have to make them and just like, no, this is a random thing that we also do. But no, I think at a more serious level, to your point, like it does provide just kind of another pathway for now for a lot of players who maybe aren't destined to play in the World Cup final, but can play in a league professionally and just kind of need a second chance and need another pathway that maybe doesn't lead through the more fractured network of individual academies or whatever. And so, while college sports are still a thing or whatever,
Yeah, right.
they should be providing, a chance for that. Having said that, I think if we get a couple of years farther down the line and the academies are really humming along on a different level and it's really just seems like kind of an absolute anachronism that is kind of in a sense maybe sending people to places they don't want to go to because that's sort of what happens in a draft from a player standpoint a lot of the time. Then I would support some sort of reform or possibly abolishing it, but I do think like I'm always partial to drafts a little bit. I know people hate the movie Draft Day, but I absolutely ride for it. That's a side note. But I do think that like, and in an ironic way to be clear, but it is, I don't know. It's just like I think about the last Revs team of like 21, that was like actually really good. And there were an underrated number of guys like Kessler, and Jones and Bai, and Tejan who came from
Yeah,
the super draft.
Buchanan was a draft pick, right? I mean,
Yeah, Tejan
yeah,
Buchanan. So maybe that is already a notion that's already a bygone thing. Like if Tejan came along now, would he still end up at like Syracuse? It's like those are questions to keep asking and re-asking. But I still think like right now, as it stands, I don't see anything that makes me want to be like, no, we should get rid of the super draft and abolish it. I understand NWSL, but that's a whole different conversation because that was built into their whole new CBA and the way in which they really changed their whole league in a sense. So MLS not doing that, I don't think it makes sense for them to also get rid of their draft.
yeah. I think you're right though. I mean, as much as the academies look, the academies are providing options for players to play at a high level. It's not something that they have to pay for, which of course is a novelty, to say the least, in youth soccer. To be able to play at a high level and not have to pay for it is really almost unheard of. But there's just no way that 30 academy programs can give playing opportunities to all the players in this country that could be good enough to, to contribute at an MLS level. So I think as long as that college option is still there, it's like baseball. A lot of baseball players get drafted straight out of high school at 18 years old, or they get signed. They get signed from outside the country. Obviously, the Caribbean countries produce an inordinate amount of good baseball players, but then there are also players that go to college and they get drafted through the college system, and it's kind of they've kept both those pathways open. So I do again. I think it's just one of those easy things that people like to flip out about, but in reality, it is still providing a pathway for good players. San Jose's starting center back pairing they're both draft picks. So maybe we should at least wait till Bruce retires, and maybe that's what we can do. That we'll stipulate that when Bruce Arena retires from coaching, then we'll get rid of the MLS draft. All right, Hayden, we were going to talk about Infantino in the World Cup, but we're getting a little tight on time here, and I don't think there's any really surprises there that Infantino tried to bring in private investment, try to kind of name himself commissioner of this whole new thing.
I for one, am shocked to find gambling in this institution or whatever. I had to say something like that, obviously. I mean, come on. Obviously, it's almost like the most predictable, scandalous news cycle I've ever seen. But yes.
And just quickly, your quick thoughts. They are now discussing, and apparently it's going to be a very short discussion. They don't have a lot of time to evaluate this. The date I heard was they have until August 14th to consider whether they do or do not want to go to a 64-team World Cup in 2030. That would be an unprecedented jump in teams between obviously the World Cup has expanded over time, but they've never gone and added 16 teams and then added 16 teams 4 years later. So do you think they should slow this down a little bit, or should they just say, let's just go ahead and do it?
I mean, like, obviously, I think the rational, my first response is tell them to slow their roll. And, obviously, yeah, as you said, like, we went many tournaments in a row of the same format most of the time before there would be any changes. And then you would go up, and then you'd be many more, changes. I mean, the last time I was in '94, it was the last 24 team, and then it was 32 until this World Cup that we just
for a
had.
while.
So, so that was quite a run. And so then to just, as you said, like, increase the number again by the same amount, a second World Cup in a row, would really be an incredible escalation. Having said that, I will say, I mean, I think if one thing happened, well, one of the legacies I think of this, of the 26 World Cup is that people saw 48 teams, was not a heavy dilution of quality. I will say, it's like, the Cape Verdes in the world, and, just like we saw, teams pull upsets and teams make runs that you would not have thought would have been a thing necessarily. So, who knows? I think, like, also the format might be a little cleaner if you went up to 64. I'm not great at math, but does that mean then that you wouldn't have to go through the whole third place team song and dance?
Yeah, we talked about this, right?
Better. Yeah.
It would just enable them to have a group stage and then go to 32 and have a knockout round. And just and just much simpler. First place, second place, you go through. Third and fourth, you go home.
You're out.
So I kind of almost feel like, whatever, you're going to do it anyway. So just give us a tournament that makes sense. This third place math stuff, we could all do without it.
Right. And what worries me, or what just makes me, I guess, a little sad, is that, like, what was already evident at this World Cup was that there was no real group of death. That would become even more so theoretically in a 64. And, then it's just, you do, I guess, introduce the, I mean, it's at that point, it's just sort of a tournament broken into a broken tournament, even more than it already was in terms of really one stage and then another. And then I think they just need to get better at the pacing of the knockout round, because they just really need to study really like half of the NCAA tournament at that point in terms of their pacing, or something maybe that's a little more drawn out, but similar to that in pacing, because it just felt like, I mean, like, there was a reason why Norway rested guys for the Norway-France game in the group stage, because they're looking down the line, knowing that they only have a couple days. And so if you could just stagger that a little bit better and make the format a couple of tweaks, I think you'd incentivize some better games, just on the ground in the group stage, and then also separately in the knockout round. So, yeah, I think it's happening. I just think they need to get their format a little tighter this time. But I guess we'll see. I mean, like, I feel like once you go up to that, you don't really go back, but
no,
that's not how FIFA works. So I think they just need to, find the right, way to do that. But the fact that they're giving this, like, weird 3-day self-imposed deadline or whatever you said, August 14th, like, that's insane to me. Yeah. That's also just totally unnecessary. That's really some FIFA nonsense if I've ever heard it.
Yeah, for sure. No, I do think the one thing that you and I were trying to figure out a time to record a show during the World Cup, and it's like, well, okay, let's see here. There's a 22-day period of time in which there is one day with no games, so we're going to shoot for that that one day. But like the thing about the NCAA tournament, though, right, is you do have that break of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, so narratives can actually develop. People can actually do stories about the teams that have advanced. So you really start to feel whereas like with this, it was just like, oh, boom, 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 just game. It was just like, where are we? The group stage ended and the knockout round started the day after, right? It's just, I do think you're right. There does need to be a little bit more of let this thing kind of build some momentum for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's if you can squeeze in here, we will do 5 minutes of Revs recap since we have stolen their background and logo and Riverside account access for the evening. Can you quickly explain to us the turf situation? So they had grass, as we all know. It was fantastic. We all loved it. It held up fantastically well during the World Cup. It was ripped up immediately thereafter. A new turf was put down for 3 Revs home games, 2 BTS concerts, and some monster trucks. That turf is now gone, and we now have a new turf. Now, I read your article, and I still don't really understand what has transpired. So can you just explain to us briefly what exactly has happened here with the Revs now having to play on their third surface in the same stadium in the same season?
Okay, so I should point out, I am myself not a turf expert, but this is just like information that I got and that I was able to report out. So in the best way I will communicate it, basically, yes, after the World Cup, they unceremoniously tore out the grass immediately and went back to the turf. They installed like a new turf surface, synthetic turf surface, and it did not include what's called an E layer or an elastic layer, which is usually one of the layers in there that you're going to put in with the turf. The reason for that is that Gillette, unlike a lot of other places that have synthetic turf that are NFL stadiums, Gillette has a like a stone dust base, which is what I was told, instead of a concrete or cement base, I guess. And so that's it's like a harder surface, and the Gillette has a slightly softer surface with stone dust. Again, those are the terms that I was given. I didn't personally examine it myself, but that's just what I was told. So, and then basically what I was told was they didn't go with, this was a conscious choice. It's not like someone like forgot to put the mat in or something, but it's like they didn't use an E layer because they didn't need it. The stone dust as a surface has more give to it than obviously concrete. And so then they did it. They put down the turf on top of that, and we had multiple games. It passed MLS and NFL sort of like field tests essentially. So there were no issues with it. And then obviously the Revs played multiple games on it. We didn't hear any complaints from players specific to that. Obviously, I know that they don't love having gone back to turf as opposed to grass, but that's a separate conversation. But as far as this turf versus that turf, in terms of comparing previous playing surfaces of synthetic turf, I didn't hear anything that was like negative about it or anything really specifically at all. It was unremarkable from what we saw. And so then, however, it was not tested. It basically came down to sort of NFL bylaw in a sense of like, or this sort of a procedural thing with the NFL where it was not tested in their lab. Now, exactly how they test a multiple level field surface in a lab, I don't claim to know that. Again, like this is just like information that was like conveyed to me. So it's like, but this is what I was told, is that they test it in a lab, and this is NFL strict procedure that the Crafts literally appealed. Again, they did this thinking that they could appeal it, that they could get it tested in this window of time before the Patriots season. The NFL said, no, you can only have it tested in this specific window before the season's, like basically in the spring. So, and because they missed that window, because they had grass down for the World Cup.
Sure.
They then, and I don't know, that's why they missed that. I mean, again, I was not told exactly why they missed that, to be honest. Like there might be more there, but also, it's like I guess I don't know. Anyway. So then they were told that did not, meet the required procedure, and so that therefore it would not be compliant. And so because, really just through a sort of, you missed a deadline, you didn't get the testing or whatever done, and not necessarily, or I shouldn't say necessarily, from what I understand, not at all because of like a performance thing or, safety
Right,
concern or
right.
anything. That's why they had to do this. So this is all just like NFL, sort of like very, very strict rule following that, and sort of NFL procedure that this is all happening. And so they had 3.5 days or they said it would take 3.5 days to change over. They started Sunday. So, they should be done well in time and should have a thing. And I'll say, to the credit of the Gillette grounds crew, they're probably getting pretty good at changing over services at this point because they've been doing it a bunch this year. So, in
Yeah,
the last
yeah,
year or
yeah,
so. So, they're probably locked in on that part, and so it'll probably be looking great. But anyway, that's why this had to happen. It's a very bizarre story, but it was just one of those things that, yeah, suddenly just kind of popped up over the weekend, and I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Really? Okay, all right, yeah.
yeah,
And then,
yeah.
and so here we are, and so it's like it's I don't know how much that's going to cost the crafts or like what the loss is or kind of whose fault is that misstep or whatever, and what the sort of tail of the tape will be on that one from an internal standpoint. But just from the team standpoint, obviously it's just another change for them, where they were probably not really happy to see change anyway, going away from the grass. And so, um, you know I guess it is what it is in a sense. But yeah, that's as much as I know. And like I said, I think I mentioned this. The Crafts did appeal this, but it was denied.
Huh. That is pretty crazy. Like I've never heard of. I guess it's a pretty unique situation, right? That they put the grass in. I mean, the grass, they tore up the turf that was on there like the day after the going away party, the send off party for the Patriots going to the Super Bowl. Um, the turf was there, and then literally the next day, gone, right? Like all torn up. And then they put the grass in. Yeah, I mean, just a crazy situation. I just thought, okay, they're going to have to get used to this surface for the rest of the year. And obviously, the results have been a little slow coming out of the gate. No one is prepared to blame their lack of form on the grass being gone. But just quickly, just to finish up on the Revs, two things. One, are they going to get themselves back on track this weekend away to Toronto? They've had 2 draws, a loss, and a win since they come out of the World Cup break. So are they going to be able to get back on track against Toronto? And what do you think about the Jack Harrison signing overall? Is that the type of move that this team really needed to make?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with Jack Harrison. I mean, we only saw little flashes of him in his debut against Houston, but he looked really, just bright. He looks exactly like the type of player that they need, who could complement Hill, someone who, if they can kind of get on the same page, or if he can get on the same page with a player like Turgeman or someone, like they can really start to do some stuff. And they can really, they can be much more dynamic. No disrespect to Yao or Zambrano, but they're younger players who are just trying to find their way, but they just have not really had a real impact, and so it's kind of been a
Mm-hmm.
hole in the offense there. And so to add not just a good player, but potentially a great MLS player, Jack Harrison, plug and play, real starter, obviously designated player, someone who can be a difference maker and beat guys off the dribble. I think potentially, and we'll see, it could be exactly what the doctor ordered for them in the attack there. But obviously, in the rest of the field, they've shown that there are some imperfections there, and especially defensively, still some question marks. I know that they're obviously dealing with some injuries. The lack of depth at right back and having to have Matt Polster out there has not gone 100%. Like there have been some times where honestly he's impressed me and he has filled in admirably overall there. Like credit to him for really stepping into a role that he hasn't played in years and that was probably never his favorite, but I know was never his favorite position anyway. He's done as well as he could be expected, but he's not a right back, and he's also not the most mobile player at this point, and so
Mm-hmm.
that's a point of concern. And I mean, you traded Ceballos. Ethan Kohler has been very good, but it's also just like you are still asking a lot of a young player to now step in and just be the penciled in starter along with Fofana. So yeah, there's some question marks at the back there, but I do expect them to get back on track. I think they were real close to getting an away win in Montreal, and I think that against a Toronto team who they certainly on paper match up well against. I would expect them to get a result there.
Yeah. No, so I think the way Toronto season has gone, it's a good opportunity to get going back on the right foot. A lot of home games a lot of away games. Coming up. So maybe they won't have to adapt to the turf because they're not going to be home very much for the next 2 months. Hayden, we really, really appreciate you coming on the show as always. I know we're running a little long here, so we do appreciate that as well. Do always like to hear your thoughts on any topic that we can throw at you. Again, you can keep up with Hayden on Boston.com, Boston Globe. You can follow him on Blue Sky as well. He's also occasionally on Twitter. We have a link directly to all of his writing on Boston.com down in the show notes. So please do check that out. If you're already not someone that looks out for his post-game thoughts after every Revs game, be sure to check that out when it does come out after every Revs game. Also, since we are borrowing their background and their login, if you have not checked out Revolution Recap, which Hayden is occasionally on, I apparently am occasionally on that show now as well. So wasn't able to completely walk away from it, apparently. Please do check out Revs Recap along with all the other great podcasts on our podcast network. And of course, please do continue to like, subscribe, and download this show in particular. Hopefully you continue to enjoy it, having guests like Hayden come on every single week. And we'll be back next week with our next guest. So again, one last thank you to Hayden. Hayden, really appreciate you coming on the show. We will see you back again soon, and we'll see all of you here again next week.